What does it mean to have great communication skills? Today, I'm going to share with you 4 key skills that all great communicators have. So number 1 is active listening. Now, I'm guessing you're thinking this is pretty counterintuitive because if you're communicating, what does that have to do with listening? And here's the big secret: everything. And here's the reason why. Because if you're communicating, presumably the purpose is to touch people, to have someone feel something or do something or not do something. And the only way, or at least the best way, to be successful at this is to actually know what someone would find as touching, or what would make someone say something or refrain from doing something or do something, right? And that's where listening comes in. Because really good listeners, first, ask lots of open-ended questions to understand what is the worldview of the person with whom they're communicating. And the more I know about your worldview, the more likely it is that I'm going to be effective in moving you. 2 researchers, Rackham and Carlisle, have looked at the most successful salespeople. And you might think that the most successful salespeople are people who make a persuasive pitch, or people who can somehow bamboozle you or trick you. But that's actually not true. The most persuasive and successful salespeople are people who spend a disproportionate amount of their time actually active listening, asking open questions, acknowledging the feelings of the other side, and paraphrasing what they hear. I'm going to tell you a story involving our current Transportation Secretary, Pete Buttigieg. As some of you may remember, Pete Buttigieg ran for president in 2020, and during the campaign, there was an op-ed written in a newspaper called The Root. So The Root is a paper that is online and that is largely directed toward African Americans. And the title of the op-ed said, "Pete Buttigieg is a lying MF." Now, I'm not going to say what MF means. I suspect most of you know, and if you don't, you could look that up in an Urban Dictionary. Let's just say if you are called an MF, this is not a really good look for you. It is not a really good way to win votes. So the question here is, how should Pete Buttigieg respond? Maybe he should ignore it. Maybe he should have someone from his comms team issue a response. Maybe he should have someone call this op-ed writer and tell him why he's wrong. But none of this actually happens. The next day, in the same newspaper, the same exact op-ed writer writes another op-ed. The title is this: "Pete Buttigieg called me. Here's what happened." And in that story, he talks about how Pete Buttigieg actually called him. And instead of defending himself, instead of communicating all the reasons why the op-ed was wrong and Pete Buttigieg was right, what Pete Buttigieg did is listen. And not just for a little bit, for 18 minutes and 45 seconds. And at the end of this op-ed, the writer doesn't say, "Oh, by the way, I'm voting for Pete Buttigieg." No, definitely not. He says, "You know what? I respect this guy." Now, I got to tell you, from a communication perspective, to move from being called a lying MF to being respected with 18 minutes and 45 seconds of listening, that's a pretty good deal. You know what else ends up happening? The op-ed writer actually invites Pete Buttigieg onto his podcast and ends up being a guest on the podcast. Just one example of why active listening is such a key communication skill. A second key communication skill, one that is also an essential leadership skill, is perspective taking. The ability to put yourself into the shoes of the other person with whom you're trying to communicate. Perspective taking is easy to say, but it's really, really hard to do. And some of the people who are really good at it historically, right? One is former American President Bill Clinton. Always had this ability to really, the phrase he would say is, "I feel your pain." But the way he did that, I think, often made people feel like he did see what the world looked like from their perspective. Another former American president, Ronald Reagan, right, called the great communicator, was also really good at crafting stories from the perspective of the average hardworking American in a way that really made you feel like he understood and saw what your world looked like. A third really important communication skill is framing. So by framing, what I mean is giving people choices in ways that make them feel like they're the hero of the story, or that the choice they're given is a very yesable proposition. So whether you are trying to influence someone to buy something or sell something or do something or not do something, one way we can do it is by using our leverage to kind of force them to say yes. But a much better way is to give them an easily yesable proposition. And that means framing choices in ways that look like wins for the other side. It also means giving the other person a role that's desirable. So for example, if you're saying something that sounds like, cockamamie nonsense to me, I could say something like, "What's wrong with you?" or "Nobody believes that," or "That's ridiculous." But that's really bad framing. It's much better for me to say, "Can you help me understand?" Or "I know you have a lot of experience here. Can you say more about?" Or "I'd be incredibly grateful here." Or "I'm sure I'm missing something. Tell me what I'm missing here." Each of those invitations is an invitation for the other side to explain themselves in a way where they're given the role as good guy, hero, experienced person. And that's what each of us wants. And that's really important from a communication perspective. So let me share with you an example of framing that I discovered after I wrote a negotiation simulation some years ago. So this was a challenging negotiation simulation. In this simulation, there were 7 candidates eligible for a life-saving vaccine. The way the simulation was set up is that there was a committee that had to choose which 3 of the 7 people would get the vaccine because there were only 3 doses available. Unfortunately, the 4 people who didn't get the vaccine would die. And here's the rub. If the committee couldn't agree unanimously which 3 of the 7 would get the vaccine, all 7 people would be denied the vaccine and therefore would die. So when I first wrote this simulation, I basically said, you need to agree which 3 get the vaccine. And if you don't agree, all 7 will die. They will not get the vaccine. And the response I got from students was, "This is depressing, this is awful, this is unfair, this is horrible, why are we doing this?" Then I made the tiniest shift, but it was a consequential one. I said, once again, there are 7 people eligible for this vaccine. But you have an important opportunity here, because you can save 3 lives. If you agree which 3 of the 7 people should get this, these 3 people will get the vaccine and will live. After that, I never heard a peep of complaint about the simulation. What was the difference? Scenario 1 was 4 people are going to die. Scenario 2 was 3 people are going to live. Everyone wants to be in a role where they can save 3 lives. No one wants to be in a role where 4 people are dying because of their decisions. Okay, last important communication skill, and it's the corollary to listening, and it's effective assertion. And I think this is an area that people often miss. They think effective assertion means aggression or digging in, and nothing could be further from the truth. Assertion and aggression are 2 different things. Effective assertion means learning to share your perspective, but also sharing the data that supports your perspective and the reasoning you have for your conclusion. Really good communicators are good at asserting their own perspective in a way that maximizes the chances that the other side could hear it. So, to recap, the skills of really good communicators are, first, excellent active listening. Second, perspective taking, putting yourself in the shoes of the person or persons with whom you're communicating. Third, framing, giving the other side attractive choices and putting them in a role that is an attractive and positive one. And lastly, effective assertion, sharing your experience, your truth, in a way that maximizes the chances that the other side will hear it. So, to continue this journey, watch this next video, which is how do I negotiate when the other side has more power? And please be sure before you leave to subscribe to my channel, like this video, and ring the bell so you never miss additional content. Okay, keep watching. Click, click, click.